Here's a few examples of drills and exercises we like to do for our youth athletes when we need to work on landing mechanics and deceleration techniques. A lot of the time we use the wrong body parts, the wrong muscle groups to absorb all the force we produce, and that's where accidents tend to happen.
A common mistake we see a lot with our young athletes is when they land from a jump, they shift a lot of their weight forward on their toes, which isn't the safest way to absorb landing forces. Another common mistake we see is athletes tend to stomp their feet when they land, adding a lot of stress to the joints. Instead, what we want is a soft, quiet landing. Notice how I didn't rock forward on my toes when I landed on the box. Learning to absorb forces properly is the first step we take. Depth drops are another great exercise to use to teach safe landing mechanics. Notice how here Brandon tends to lean forward on his toes when he's landing. Instead, what we want to see is an absorption of the landing through the hips. As soon as you make contact with the ground, try to sit back. Bounding is another great drill for deceleration technique. We commonly see the mistake Brandon's making in our young athletes, where he leans forward on his toes instead of sinking in the hip. Here's what we want to see in our athletes: a nice, soft, quiet landing, letting the posterior chain absorb the force of the landing. Lateral deceleration is another key component to a young athlete's program. Notice how Brandon keeps bouncing off the floor when he lands, and his upper body is swaying. Here's a better example of good upper body control and good landing mechanics while moving laterally. Now let's talk about some common errors we see when an athlete is running and has to stop abruptly. Notice how Brandon had to take some exaggerated extra steps and lean forward on his toes. Instead, we need to use our posterior chain to absorb the deceleration forces. We instruct our athletes to strike the ground from a heel-to-toe foot contact and then sink the hips.